Archaeologists in Egypt made a groundbreaking discovery this week under ancient sands.
I never seen something like this.
Beneath a desert that had kept its secrets for 3,000 years, archaeologists uncovered a tomb that felt strangely unfinished, as if history itself had been interrupted mid-sentence.
We've got a monument that once stood right on top of this mountain.
What they found inside did not simply reveal a ruler's death, but a hidden rescue mission that rewrote how Egypt protected its kings from oblivion. Discovery that reopened a century of silence. The excavation began with cautious optimism, familiar to Egyptian archaeology, where years of searching often yield only fragments of the past. The site drew attention because of subtle terrain anomalies, faint architectural lines beneath the desert light, and historical records hinting at a nearby royal presence. The team expected clues, but not a discovery capable of challenging long-held assumptions about early royal burials. As workers cleared debris with brushes and wooden tools, the atmosphere shifted from routine work to growing anticipation. The deeper they dug, the more deliberate the construction appeared, with precisely placed blocks and traces of pigment preserved for millennia. These details suggested that the tomb had not been abandoned in chaos, but carefully handled long after its original burial. When the entrance was exposed, the team paused before entering, aware of the rarity of such moments. Inside, the chamber felt both royal and incomplete, containing signs of ceremonial preparation, yet missing elements expected in a traditional pharaoh's tomb. That contradiction raised immediate questions about whether the burial had remained untouched or had been altered by later events. As documentation progressed, researchers noticed clues pointing beyond a single moment in time, including signs of rewrapping, rearranged artifacts, and inscriptions suggesting later activity. The discovery felt less like opening a sealed past and more like entering an ongoing story, one that connected ancient caretakers with modern archaeologists and hinted at a period when even kings required protection after death. Egypt's fragile age, why kings were no longer safe. To understand why this tomb differed from earlier royal burials, archaeologists looked back to the Third Intermediate Period, a time when Egypt's centralized power weakened and political authority fragmented. After the new kingdom declined, rival centers competed for control, economic strains spread across the Nile, and the institutions that once protected royal tombs began to fail, even as the pharaoh's divine image remained central in ritual. This instability had serious consequences for the dead. Tombs that were once heavily protected became targets for organized robbery, with archaeological evidence showing repeated intrusions where valuables were stripped away and sacred spaces damaged. Ancient judicial papyri even describe investigations into tomb theft, revealing that some guards themselves participated, driven by economic pressure and collapsing oversight. For priests responsible for funerary rites, the crisis demanded more than ritual maintenance. Preserving royal bodies now required intervention, planning, and secrecy, forcing them to balance religious duty with practical survival. The traditional system built on permanence no longer worked in a world where hidden protection mattered, more than monumental display. Researchers began to see that the unusual features of this tomb reflected that tension. Signs of disturbance showed careful handling rather than violent looting, suggesting that later visitors entered with purpose. As the historical context became clearer, the discovery appeared less like an anomaly and more like evidence of a wider strategy, one in which priests actively worked to preserve royal legacy during an era when even the afterlife required protection. The secret operation, when priests became protectors. As archaeologists compared evidence from the tomb with findings from other Upper Egyptian sites, a clear pattern emerged. During the Third Intermediate Period, priests were not merely repairing damaged burials, they coordinated efforts to recover and protect royal mummies threatened by theft. This quiet network of priests, embalmers, and officials treated the king's remains as sacred responsibilities that had to be relocated and safeguarded in secrecy. The process was careful and systematic. Compromised tombs were reopened, bodies were removed, inspected, and rewrapped, and ritual care was maintained even while practical decisions were made to ensure survival. Linen layers, resin applications, and rebandaging techniques show that the goal was preservation rather than disturbance, balancing religious duty with the urgent realities of a dangerous era. What makes this operation especially striking is the documentation left behind. Priests added written dockets to some mummies, recording when and where relocations occurred, turning the process into an organized bureaucratic system rather than an improvised response. Similar records from royal caches suggest that the newly discovered tomb may have been part of the same preservation network. Inside the chamber, researchers observed reorganized funerary materials and deliberate placement choices consistent with this hidden system. Instead of chaos, there was order, revealing a calculated effort to protect royal memory while avoiding political or religious backlash. The discovery transformed the tomb's story from a single burial into evidence of a larger human effort to preserve history, raising the question of what else might have survived from this quiet rescue mission. Inside the tomb, what the archaeologists actually found. As the excavation moved deeper into the chamber, the layout revealed a familiar yet unsettling contrast, with royal architecture surrounding contents that told a more complex story. Traces of pigment and fragments of inscriptions pointed to traditional ritual scenes, but the arrangement of objects suggested the tomb had experienced more than one phase of use. Instead of a single frozen moment, the space carried signs of later intervention. Near the burial area, archaeologists found linen wrappings showing secondary handling, including layers and resin treatments that differed from the original embalming phase. These details matched known examples of priestly rewrapping from later periods, supporting the idea that the body had been carefully maintained rather than looted. On-site analysis of fibers, pigments, and organic residue helped confirm that even small fragments held evidence of deliberate care. Inscriptions and markings resembling administrative notes suggested that those who re-entered the tomb wanted to document their actions. Although not all labels survived, the ordered placement of objects echoed patterns seen in royal caches, where priests recorded mummy relocations for protection. The chamber felt less like an abandoned burial and more like a managed repository shaped by custodians preserving something sacred. For the archaeologists, discovery quickly turned into quiet analysis, as they realized they were witnessing both a pharaoh's story and the later efforts that allowed it to survive. As evidence accumulated, the tomb came to represent a crossroads of ritual, crisis, and preservation, forcing scholars to reconsider whether these priests were simply reacting to danger or actively reshaping how royal memory would endure, rewriting the story of power, death, and memory. As analysis continued, the discovery challenged a long-held belief in Egyptology that later disturbances inside royal tombs were mostly caused by looting. Evidence from this site suggested a more deliberate story, since patterns of rewrapping and careful repositioning pointed toward preservation rather than destruction. Instead of erasing the past, those who re-entered the tomb appeared to be protecting it, even if their actions reshaped how later generations would understand the burial. Scholars compared the findings with royal caches like TT 320, where priests relocated mummies and left written dockets recording when and where transfers occurred. These records showed that relocation was not chaotic or desperate, but an organized operation supported by religious duty and administrative planning. The parallels suggest that this tomb may be another piece of that wider preservation network, revealing how systematic the effort became during periods of instability. This reinterpretation reframes priests as active decision-makers rather than passive caretakers, balancing theology with survival while determining how royal memory would endure. Although researchers remain cautious because archaeology rarely provides absolute certainty, the evidence strongly supports intentional intervention rather than random disturbance. Ultimately, the discovery transforms the tomb into more than an isolated find. It becomes a reflection on how humans negotiate with time itself, preserving the past so it can survive long enough to be understood again. The legacy beneath the sand. By the time the excavation entered its final phase, the meaning of the discovery had expanded far beyond the boundaries of a single tomb, because it revealed how ancient Egyptians responded to crisis not by abandoning their past, but by adapting the way they protected it. The evidence suggested a society that understood history as something fragile, requiring active stewardship rather than passive reverence. For modern archaeologists, that realization carries a quiet irony, since the same impulse that drove priests to hide and document royal mummies now drives researchers to uncover and interpret them with equal care. The tomb also reshaped scholarly conversations about continuity in Egyptian civilization, showing that even during political fragmentation, religious institutions maintained systems capable of large-scale coordination. Written dockets, rewrapping practices, and organized relocations demonstrate a level of administrative thinking that bridged generations, connecting the intentions of long-dead rulers with the practical decisions of those tasked with preserving their memory. Instead of viewing the period as a simple decline, historians increasingly describe it as a transformation, where survival required innovation hidden behind ritual language. Standing inside the chamber, researchers often described a sense of layered presence, as though multiple eras coexisted in the same space. The original builders honoring a king, the priests quietly safeguarding him centuries later, and modern scientists attempting to decode both stories without disturbing their balance. That continuity reminds us that history is rarely preserved by chance alone, because human choices determine what survives and what disappears beneath time and sand. As the team prepared to close the site and continue analysis in laboratories, the discovery left behind a question that lingered long after the dust settled, inviting reflection on how civilizations remember their dead and how those decisions shape the stories future generations inherit. Centuries apart, priests and archaeologists stood for the same quiet purpose, protecting memory from disappearance and giving lost voices another chance to be heard. Beneath the sand, history survives because someone chooses to care for it, and every discovery reminds us to keep listening and keep searching.